Oh, hello, everybody. Welcome back to the General Eclectic Podcast with Rod Dreer. I'm your host, Kale Zeldin. And here we are, Rod, at number 15. How you doing today?
I'm okay. I am getting ready to go to Budapest at the end of this week. Maybe we could talk a little bit about it at the end of this podcast because it's going to affect the way we record. But it's weird to think that I've been thinking about this thing for a while now, and it's finally going to happen, COVID and everything. So, yeah, it's weird to have to spend this week getting all my things together and all the clothes I have to take for 2.5 months. June, July, probably be there in August, maybe 3 months.
That's a crazy long time. I mean, hopefully you'll have access to some laundry facilities and the whatnot. Yeah, but no, it's a long time to be gone. I have to say that I'm a little jealous. But we are heading into, I think, the glory time here up in New England. It's still a little bit cold here spring-wise. We had a couple of really nice weeks. We've reverted back to the normal coolish spring, but really the spring and the summer are glorious here. And I know it's the only time I really get to gloat with you, Rod.
Well, yeah, and you're from Baton Rouge, as our regular listeners know, so you know exactly what fate I'm escaping this summer.
Yeah. No, be honest. You set this up to just coincide with the worst months of hell on planet Earth, right?
No, I actually didn't, but it could not have worked out better. Let me put it that way. But it's going to be crazy because Budapest, like many of the cities in Europe, many of the countries in Europe, Hungary's locked down. 7 is going to have a curfew at night and all that. I'm going to have to live by that, but. Being locked down in Budapest, even if it lasts all summer, it's preferable to spending summer in South Louisiana, which is just so hot and humid. People, I tell people about it, and they really can't. They think I'm making it up, and then if they come here to visit, they're like, "Holy cow, you're right."
Yeah, I've had like friends of mine from Arizona and really hot places, and they'll come. And they would visit over the summer when I was in college. And they'd come and visit, and they just couldn't believe it. I mean, they thought we were just being babies about the heat, and it's like, no, we're not being babies. It sucks.
It is the humidity.
It really is. It really is. It's just terrible. But
there's lots of more terrible things in the world we have to get to this week.
Yeah, well, that's what we do, right? We do. Let's talk about all the terrible things. Well,
that's our brand.
That's right. This week in terrible news, we have the corporations. Last week, I believe we mentioned the corporations. Yes, we mentioned last week that the very large multinationals that are based in Georgia decided. Apparently without even reading the bill, that the state legislature had done its best to revert us back to Jim Crow, as you heard many people say, and
Jim Crow on steroids, said our president.
Yes, the president himself said this was Jim Crow on steroids, which is, I got to tell you. Well, anyway, I'll put that on the side for a second. I find it deeply, deeply irresponsible. But at any rate, they exerted some pressure on Major League Baseball to pull their All-Star game out of the Atlanta area, and I think they moved it to Colorado. But anyway, that's not the point. The point is that they had decided to punish, these corporations had decided to exert some influence to punish the great state of Georgia for its deep, deep sins here. And I don't know about you, but I found it to be pretty surprising how many people kind of came out of the woodwork. People like friendly with me who are not terribly political, who are not terribly online. And wow, they were pretty ripped up about this one. They were pretty ticked off. But here we are in the next week, and it seems like there was a big spooky meeting of 130 corporate heads to sort of expand the work
over the weekend.
Yeah. What is this?
Well, a guy named Sonnenfeld, I forget his first name, a professor at Yale. He put together this meeting of corporate CEOs and got a bunch of them, major corporate CEOs, to come together to talk about how we have to stand together to fight for the right to vote. That's how they construe this. It's major voting rights.
Yeah, they are masters at the frame, aren't they?
Sure.
So good at it.
And they know they can get away with it because they have a sympathetic media. And they're talking about ways they can use their capital, literally, to push state legislatures around to get them to abandon these voting reform initiatives. Now, what really bothers me about this, leaving aside whether or not the proposals in the different states, which none of them know much about, I guarantee you that, leaving aside whether or not that's good public policy, these proposals, the idea that big business, which is already immensely powerful in this society, is going to reserve to itself the right to use its economic might to force state legislators and lectors to do what they want. I mean, it's just insane. It drives me crazy. It's oligarchical. And they might get away with it because they're doing this for what the media class and considers virtuous reasons.
Right, and they're sort of playing they're on the right side of history game, sure. which is gross and disgusting, inaccurate, and Hegelian gobshite. I mean, it just drives me bonkers that this talk about the right side of history. It's just it's a problem. But what is fascinating to me about it is that the left has traditionally been on the side of labor, and and has done some great things for the worker internationally, and I mean that unironically as a conservative. But it seems that they have ditched labor, certainly labor that you and I would understand in our own country. Working men and women. The left seems to have ditched labor in favor of something else. And one of my favorite sort of cultural commentators, Eric Weinstein, makes this point a lot. I believe it's an idea he got from his wife, who's also an economist. But basically the idea is that the left has found a constituency that is cheaper than labor, and what they have found that is cheaper than labor is identity. And I think it's a real insight into the way this whole game works. And I think it dovetails into a lot of the things that you and I have been talking about with the advent of the identity movement. That identity doesn't really cost anything in the way that labor costs something.
Well, I may have mentioned this last week when we talked about the All-Star game, but I heard from a friend of mine who is a Democratic Party operative and crunches a lot of data for them. And he said, listen, the thing you have to understand is what these corporations care about is labor, not labor in the sense of the working class, but rather getting executives to be able to move around as they want. And a lot of these
but that's not labor. That's management.
Okay, right.
So that's what's so funny. I mean, that's what this weird switch is what we're talking about here.
But his point is that these hotshots coming out of Yale Business School, Harvard, and so on and so forth, they don't want to live in bigot states, quote unquote bigot states. They want to live in progressive states. So what this is about, according to my Democratic friend who actually wants to see these policies change,
sure.
He said it's all about guaranteeing an adequate supply or a good supply of labor. And if you're going to try to get some young person to move to Bentonville, Arkansas, to work in Walmart corporate, you're going to have to give them, you're going to have to pay really top salaries. You're going to have to give them the hard sell. And the idea that Arkansas is an anti-LGBT state is going to make your job harder. Similarly, Georgia and these other states, if they get the reputation for being, for Jim Crow, as appalling as that is, it's going to make it harder for these corporations. The thing that just pisses me off so much about the left is they're so easily bought. They don't seem to understand that if corporations, as long as they virtue signal about cultural issues important to the left, they can get away with treating their workers however they want to. And it's just wrong. And I think, and I talk about this in Live Not by Lies, that corporations are going to work hand in hand with the surveillance state at some point to impose the social credit system. And it's gonna happen. Republicans are feeble because the Republicans have for so long given big business anything it wanted. This is what a reader of my blog talked this past week about how the military is going so woke now, and it knows it can because the Republicans will never, ever, ever say no to the military.
Yeah, no, they won't. The Republican Party, of course, I mean, that's why this is such a sort of a strange cognitive shift or crack or break in the sort of the way that you attempt to understand the way all of this is working, because, when we were younger, the Republican Party was the party of business. It was the party of corporations, et cetera, and somewhat whatever, it was what it was, right? But now there's this weird split and divide. My question to you is, why do you think it's more profitable? Why do corporations see this as more profitable to sort of ditch the business party and to sort of take on the tack to the left here?
Yeah, one of the most naive things you hear from leftists is that, well, the Democrats are the party of the working man and all that. I'm like, not since Bill Clinton showed up. Yeah. Bill Clinton did a fantastic job for the Democratic Party in transforming it from a party of labor to a party of business. I remember, I'm old enough to remember, Kale, the cover of Time magazine back in, I guess it was 98, around then, had Larry Summers, Alan Greenspan. Larry Summers was Treasury Secretary under Clinton, he was maybe Clinton's top economic advisor. Greenspan was the head of the Federal Reserve. Fed. Who was the third guy? Can't think of his name. Citibank. Anyway, another one of these New York financiers. It said the Committee to Save the World. Right. And back when in the late 90s and even in the 2000s, the Clintonite Democrats and the Republicans got together to remove a lot of the regulations, Depression-era regulations on Wall Street. This was celebrated by the Republicans and the Democrats as modernization. We get to the crash 10 years later, this horrible crash. There's this fantastic PBS Frontline episode called The Warning about this woman, Brooksley Bourne. She was a second-level bureaucrat in, I think, Treasury Department. She warned them all and documented that this was going to happen. This crash was going to happen. They all tried to shut her down. Larry Summers, all of them, tried to shut her down, say that she's going to be bad for business. But she said that this was going to happen. My point is simply this. The Democrats are so in bed with Wall Street and corporate interests, and it's just as naive as Republicans to think of the Republican Party as a party of business now. Things have changed so much. I got to say one more thing.
Yeah.
The only force big enough now, powerful enough in this country to stand up to big business is the state. Now, I don't like big government, but I don't like big business either. And the state, for all its problems, it is at least democratically accountable. These corporations are not accountable.
Yeah, I was just going to ask that you anticipated my question, and are the corporations, certainly when they can be rallied over a weekend to have this large, meeting organized by a Yale professor, which is also hilarious, or not hilarious at all. Are they more powerful than the government right now?
Well, I'll put it to you like this. Here in Baton Rouge, Amazon is about to open a big fulfillment center, warehouse thing. But they're tearing down the old Cortana Mall, which you'll remember from your childhood.
Of course.
And from what I understand,
where else were you going to go get your Coca-Cola rugby shirts and your Gerbeau jeans? I mean, you had to go to the Cortana Mall.
Yeah.
You had to go to the Cortana Mall, man. Come on.
Man, I remember parachute pants at merry-go-round. Those were the days.
Oh, you betcha. You betcha.
Anyway, if what has happened here has happened if what's happened in other places that have opened these is happening here in Baton Rouge, then our city parish government has been slapped around by Amazon because governments are desperate to get these jobs in. And Amazon can come in and just dictate conditions to them. But this is not just Amazon. This is true in many places, especially places like Louisiana that are have been really struggling, to make to diversify economically. So, they are so powerful. In Live Not by Lies, I talk about how like Walmart has more money on hand than the government of Spain. It's bigger than the government of Spain, and things like that. They really do run things. But this is one of those cases where normally they work behind the scenes, and we expect business to get involved in lobbying for things that affect their bottom line. This doesn't affect their bottom line. They're doing this to try to virtue signal, and you know what? I think it's probably going to work.
Yeah, I think it is going to work too, but I'm struggling to understand. Okay, I'm struggling to find a place where I can feel like there's a place to mount some sort of counterbalance to what I see as just everything running to one side of the proverbial ship. I mean, there's no ballast left. I mean, I wrote myself a note before we got started. So it would seem that the forces that have aligned themselves with, identity politics, roughly understood, corporations, the educational establishment, the military, the entertainment industry, the professional athletic associations and corporations, big tech in the form of Google and Facebook and Twitter and TikTok. So many of the churches, especially those churches that don't enjoy a kind of broad, slow by design setup like your church and my church. I don't know an arena in which they don't have total capture.
Yeah. Well, this is the problem, right? It feels like we're alone here because we are. That's the thing that's starting to dawn on more and more cultural conservatives is that the veil is slipping away, and we're beginning to see how much is aligned against us. I put on my blog today, just as we're talking, some documents that a reader of mine sent me from his college. It's his last class before he gets his master's, and it's total critical race theory. And they present this stuff, highly contestable claims, as if it were gospel truth. Yeah. And he was like, this is what the next generation is going to be educated in. And it makes you wonder, you start to get paranoid. You're like, where's the pushback to any of this? It's not coming from anybody. And I got to tell you, I think a lot of it is people don't want to know. They just don't want.
What do you mean they don't want to know?
Because to know is to be responsible. I think many people, ordinary people, don't want to know about all this going on, because if they know about it, it's going to disturb their peace. And it's going to mean that they have to make decisions and do things that are going to make them unpopular, they're going to make them uncomfortable. I have these conversations all the time. I was talking to a guy I know, a Christian friend, who was talking about how in his church, a few of them can see things that are coming, but the leadership of the church just doesn't want to get involved. I talked to another friend who's higher up in a hierarchy of a certain Protestant church, in his state. And he said it's just unbelievable that they're hearing from people all over the state, pastors who are like, what do we say about critical race theory? What do we say about LGBT and queer rights and all that stuff? Mm-hmm. And the top leadership of the church just doesn't want to deal with it because it's just, he said that one of the leaders said, it's just too hot. My friend said, that's exactly why we have to deal with it, because it's so hot. And parents are having to deal with it all the time. I found out from a guy, I told you this privately, I'll speak, I told you who it was, but a friend of mine said that at a Catholic girls' school in his town, almost half of the girls in that high school identify as lesbian, bisexual, or non-binary. Now, are they really? No, of course they're not. But this is the fad, and it's happening in a Catholic high school. And there's no escape from this stuff. But a lot of parents want to live in in this cartoon version of the Benedict option of saying, like, if we just huddle down, it's not going to happen to us. It's not going to happen here. There's no place to hide.
Well, I think this is why I think a lot about, education, and I think a lot about leadership. And I think that I think a lot about why, for instance, why do people choose a private school over a functioning public school?
Mm-hmm.
And I remember talking with a friend of mine, and he said, "Oh, well, Kale, it's obvious. It's insurance. You're buying insurance for your kid." And I thought about it for a long time, and I think he's basically right. And I think what he means is this: like, look, you can go to a functioning public school and get a good education. Obviously, that word "functioning" is doing a lot of work in this construction, just for the sake of the conversation. But you don't kind of know. Anybody can go, as you know, right? But in a private school, it's by its very nature, it's selected, right? It's a curated social group, almost exclusively by finances, right? By class. And so you send your kid to a private school because it's it's a pre-selected peer group that you have a better shot, right, of keeping your kid sort of normalish in a normalish environment. And I think that is precisely the grounds in which people are fooling themselves, to think that they can buy insurance for their kids by sending them to a private school. And as I like to tell you all the time, I mean, Wi-Fi works in private schools just as much as it works in a public school. Wi-Fi works, in an open space just as much as it works in a gated space. And we fool ourselves. And I think, look, what really bothers me about this is, I was talking to a friend of mine, Larry, a chap, about the church leadership. And he said, look, Kale, most of those are just sort of, they're selected for their ability to sort of keep the lights on and keep things moving and keep those, the bishop's appeals going and all that sort of stuff. They really, really hope that whatever's coming will come after they're done. They can kind of get to retirement and then let the next group kind of worry about the problem. And look, at some point, just like in a game of musical chairs, at some point the music stops and there's only 2 chairs and there's 3 of you left.
Well,
right?
It's
that's what I think we're facing.
Yeah, it's interesting you put it that way. A guy I was talking to the other day said that he thinks this is what's going to happen in the military. That's what is happening in the military. And he's involved with it. It's a military adjacent, let's put it this way. He's in the government, a bureaucrat. But he said that he can see that's what is happening now in the military, that a lot of the officer corps, they just want to say what's necessary to avoid trouble and to protect their ability to slide out after retirement and take cushy jobs in the private sector.
Yeah, right. Now that's such a great point, right? I mean, they're that's sort of, again, I think it's selfish, right? I mean, by its nature, and it's self-serving. And what's fascinating to me is that it has parasitized an institution that is predicated on, at least in theory, and certainly in the way that they talk about themselves, it's predicated on service. Right? I mean, what do we say at Veterans Day? What do we say at these holidays? Thank you for your service, which is true. Like I do, in fact, thank these people who have served in the military. The problem is that it's also really lucrative to sort of go along to get along so that you can cash out upon retirement at 45, 50, and then you've got another 15 years of big earning. I mean, that's a perverse incentive, isn't it, Ron?
Yeah, it is. I was talking to a friend of mine today, a conservative back east, old friend, and we were talking about a particular business that I know about. The older generation, very, very conservative, want to keep the business in the family, so to keep things that way. Well, they've handed it over to the younger generation who has embraced all kinds of wokeness and brought the business to support all kinds of woke initiatives that the older generations would have gone nuts over. But so there's no way to guarantee. And that led to a conversation between me and my friend. We were talking about that, and he said, he's got kids about my kid's age, and he said, it's so difficult as a conservative to see my kids and what the whole Trump thing has done to them, because they've been raised in a very conservative household. But to them, Trump is conservatism. He said it's all well and good for me to talk about. No. Russell Kirk, kids, Russell Kirk. When the only example they've ever had, or certainly the most vivid example they've had of what conservatism actually means outside of their house is Donald Trump. Mm-hmm. And that really resonated with me because my kids are the same way. They really are. My older son's 21. He's in college. He's not woke. That stuff doesn't really interest him. Economics interest him, and he's a Bernie bro. And you can't talk to him about conservatism. And he's told me that before. He said, conservatism brought us Donald Trump, Dad, and you will never be able to, my generation will never elect another Republican. Well, he can't know that, but and he's a kid. I talked the same way when I was his age about Democrats. Nevertheless, I think it's
actually, I agree with him. I actually think we've seen the last Republican president for like 25 years.
Yeah. Well, you would know better because you're dealing with kids and in your role as a high school teacher. Mm-hmm. But so tell me more about that. You think that we can't?
It's such a tarnished brand. I mean, it doesn't even matter what's true anymore, right? And that pains me because look, me, Rod. I'm not a political person first. I'm really kind of a religious and cultural person first, and
as am I.
The rest of that stuff sort of hopefully follows, and and I vote and I do all that sort of stuff, and sometimes I do it begrudgingly, but I think that when I start to think about the psychology of voting and like what does it mean to put a Biden sticker on the back of your car. I live in a very blue state. Brown University's right down the road. This is not exactly, East Texas. And I see the way in which people posture and signal and brand. And I think my conservative friends who live in conservative states don't quite understand how much, what does the MAGA hat mean? Like, what does it symbolically mean? And I don't I actually don't think that Trump is a Nazi. I don't think anything like that. Mm-hmm. I think that, I think I have somewhat of a nuanced view about all those sort of things, but fine. Most people think they have nuanced views. But I guess what troubles me is just how much people are brand conscious and just how much the brand of the R's has been, I think, forever tarnished. I do think that. Certainly from a sort of a national political level, I just don't see somebody being able to do it. Now, look, I could be wrong. I mean, somebody could come wrong. I mean, look, Trump rebranded. I mean, that's not what the Republican Party was when you and I were, young adults and reading ourselves into
Bill Clinton rebranded.
Some versions of neoconism, right? But so it is very much a rebrand, but it's a pretty deep tarnish, I think.
Yeah, and this is really, you're really right. It's one thing that a lot of conservatives, normally conservatives, just can't understand is that how unappealing it is. We can sit around and complain about the libs all we want, and we will, and we do, and because there's a lot to complain about.
Sure.
Nevertheless, though, it was interesting to me because my friend, the guy I was having this conversation with, is one of the smartest conservatives I know. Really, a genuinely literary, interesting, and conservative intellectual. And even he is talking about just how hard it is to keep his kind of conservatism front to mind among his children, as they age. And it's just something that I hadn't realized it was so common. But just today, this afternoon, I think the New York Times had a story about the sons and daughters of prominent conservative evangelical leaders now having left the church.
Yeah,
period.
yeah.
You know, and
well, look, Rod, you talk a lot about, look at the work that you've done in the past, what is it, 6-8 years with the Benedict option and Live Not by Lies. I mean, you've been really gearing your whole, the prime here of your career into these movements, because I think you see something that's real and something that's true, but you primarily see this in the lens of religion, which makes sense. That's what you and I care about, right? But I think, in addition to, the sort of, how do you raise your kid Christian, right? I mean, that's one of the things you and I talk about privately. It's one of the things you blog about all the time. We talk about Christian Smith and, what you can do and how you witness to your children and all that sort of stuff. But I think more even broad than that is, what if you are a conservative-minded person, an intellectual, maybe religious, maybe not, but how do you raise your kids even in that? Now, I think the two are of a piece. My sort of conservatism culturally stems from my conservatism vis-a-vis my faith and the received tradition and my belief in the need to protect and foster and preserve the tradition, religiously speaking. But I think we also recognize that this is a cultural thing too. And, I wonder if you have any thoughts on that. You focus so much on the preservation of faith communities. I mean, how much have you thought about the preservation of, thought communities or art communities or cultural communities or cuisine communities? I just wonder what you think about that.
Yeah, well, that's a lot of the Benedict option is about that. And I drew it from Robert Louis Wilkins' great essay from 2004 in First Things called Church as Culture, the Church as Culture. And his point is that religious beliefs are carried in a culture. We talk a lot in a negative
they're
way.
Nested. Yeah, they're nested in the story we tell about ourselves. Yeah.
Right. And we talk a lot in a critical sense. We talk about cultural Christianity, people who don't really believe it. They're just, and there is, and it's right to complain about that, because you're not saved by culture. On the other hand, culture is the frame within which the religion is presented, the faith is presented. And if you don't have that culture, that strong culture, the language, the symbolism, all that sort of thing, then it's harder and harder to pass the faith along. I think this is one reason why often when you meet ex-Catholics, they haven't just gone to a different church. They quit going to church altogether. They can't quite get the church out of them because the symbolic matrix of Catholicism is so powerful. The sensual matrix of Catholicism, it's so powerful. And I think it's powerful for a very normal reason, a very easy to understand reason, because we're incarnate beings.
Yeah, we have bodies.
We have bodies. We have bodies. And, as I've talked about before here, Paul Connerton, that British social anthropologist, an atheist, a Marxist, he talked about the way that traditional cultures have survived modernity is they've had a sacred story that they've told ritually, and they've used their bodies in enacting the story. I mean, that's what we do in church, but it's not enough just that, right? I mean,
I just want to correct something I said. I said we have bodies. I think the proper way to say it is we are bodies.
Yeah.
So anyway, sorry.
Psychosomatic unity. So I mean, if that were true, though, I mean, I think what he said is true. But my kids go to the liturgy on Sunday. We fast in my family. We do the things Orthodox Christians are supposed to do, and yet I hope I don't have any illusions that is going to be sufficient. I think that it will give my kids a better chance of staying connected in a real and living way to the faith. But there's so many pressures coming from outside.
Well, and right, okay, sorry again to interrupt you here, but I work with kids every day, and I just based upon some of my observations, I think we have to make the whole thing, kind of compelling. I said, a few episodes back, be weird, it's important. And what I mean by that is, we already know that in this time of intense novelty, especially as generated by the internet and social media and new memes and new idea. So we are in an intense battle with novelty. Now remember, novelty is not evil. But novelty is always a threat to order. Novelty is always a threat to something that has been kind of settled. And that which has been settled is always runs the risk of becoming rigid and ossified and therefore seen as not a living tradition. I think that's why in our terms we always talk about the living God and the living tradition, because otherwise they become sort of stone carvings, and therefore they don't really talk to the moment. And so we already know that because we live in this period of intense novelty, that it's always going to be a little weird for us to make a case for like old things. And as I look back on my own development intellectually and just as my person, my tastes, the way that I see the world, in this sort of weird moment in 1987, 88, 89. I don't know if you remember pop music in 87, 88, 89, 90,
yeah,
but it was a dry spell. And so in that weird moment, because I had older brother who was into music, I had older cousins that were into music. I had people that exposed me. I did this sort of strange retro dive into what we now know of as classic rock, the music of the late 60s and throughout the 70s. And I think that about this all the time, that I because of that experience, I already had a model in my head that I could go back in time, even if it was just a decade before, but I could go back in time and retrieve something that felt more substantial than what was just being played on the radio. And anything that can survive a decade, much less a century, much less a millennia, anything that can survive even a decade, has the markers of something that is more substantive. It's sort of the development of the classical mind. And I know I'm talking about rock music, and we can make arguments about that. We're talking about the Rolling Stones. We're talking about Led Zeppelin. We're talking about the great stuff. But even that you could look back, on the top 100 chart, right? And say, okay, well, these actual 5 songs, these are worth keeping around. Like even that as an idea, that already marks you as kind of an odd person. And so if we're talking about our young people and we're talking about how to raise them in the faith, we're talking about how to raise them in a culture that has more staying power than whatever will hang around for the moment before you take the picture and it's gone. I think we have to develop in them a sense that there's something worth retrieving.
Yeah, well, I was at church on Sunday, my Orthodox church here in Baton Rouge, and I was talking to one of my friends there, a guy's about my age, and he was pointing to some of the young people who've come around in the last couple of years. I'm talking about people in their 20s, some married, some engaged. We've had a surprising number, you would think, for something like as odd as Eastern Orthodoxy in a place like Baton Rouge. Mm-hmm. And my friend spends a lot more time talking to him than I do because he's really involved in serving at the altar. And he said, look at all of them. Do you know why they're here? I'm like, no, why are they here? He said, they're here because they all got fed up with Protestantism and because Protestantism is falling apart. And they came desperately searching for something worth holding on to, something different. Mm-hmm. And they came here and they found it in Orthodoxy. Mm-hmm. Now, it's not like we've got, our church, we meet in a rented space. We make it as nice as we can. But his point was simply this, that they're looking, my friend said, he's a convert from the Episcopal Church. He said, they stayed for the same reason I stayed. And my friend was trying to encourage me, trying to get me to see that, look, there's reason to hope. Yeah, everything looks really bad and things are pretty bad. But there are people, as long as there are people who will be looking, we've got to make sure they have something to find. And that did give me hope. And it makes me realize, too, how I've tried on the Substack I write to focus on reasons to hope. And that was a good word for my friend, because it's just so boring to complain all the time. And I'm criticizing myself here.
Yeah, yes.
And I think it's important to point out this stuff, like the fact that business is getting involved in these particular issues in the same way it did 6 years ago with the Religious Freedom Restoration Act in Indiana. Yeah. These are huge turns in our culture, and we have to talk about them. But this is one of the things I hope to do with my next book, is find reasons and showcase reasons, not only reasons to hope, but means by which we can keep hope alive through this crisis that we're going to. Because, look, I'm convinced more and more that it kind of freaks me out to say, like, gosh, I was right about that. Well, it's like the Benedict option. People say, "Oh, you're so doom and gloom." Like, I almost got to the point where I laugh at myself over it. Mm-hmm. But then, holy cow, 2020, 2021, which is being an extension of 2020. This is what's happening. And God help us with the Chauvin trial. I mean, Well,
yeah, I wanted to talk a little bit about that. And by the way, it's a shame. The real reason why the COVID lockdowns have been so awful is that it precluded you from being able to take your victory lap. I can say that. But anyway, because you were right. You were right about where all this was going and where we were headed, and I think you read the signs of the times, as we are admonished to do. But I think you really did, and hopefully, I believe that more people are seeing, or at least, however begrudgingly, are acknowledging that you saw something as real. But right, so I am concerned, to go back to the Chauvin trial and the Floyd trial, and look, full disclosure, I am not a legal analyst. I am not a lawyer. I'm not going to comment on that.
But you are a sexy beast. May I say that?
Thank you. Of course, right. Which will allow me to comment on all manner of things, right? Because I am indeed a sexy beast. Well, no, but I'm very worried about what's happening here culturally with the trial, and there are two things, at least in my head, that I see them. Like, you want to make sure that justice is served, right? Period. Full stop. And, from appearances as a layman and watching the videos like I've watched, it's pretty damn awful. But I also know that there's a reason, contra to Chelsea Handler and other celebrities, there's a reason why we have trials, and there's a reason why, the legal system is set up in such a way, and there's the reasonable doubt standard for these criminal proceedings. And I'm very worried that the very loud people on cable news and the very loud people on Twitter are talking the country into a riot. I mean, I really am deeply concerned about this.
They absolutely are. Look, over the weekend, my son Matt and I watched Fritz Lang's 1931 film M. With Peter Lorre in it. M is he's the murderer, and he's a kidnapper of children, and he kills children. And the whole city of Berlin is out looking for him, both the police and the underworld. And the underworld people finally find him, and they bring him into a basement for this sort of kangaroo court, and they appoint for M, who admits that he's guilty. They appoint a defense lawyer, and it's just almost like to make a sham or to make a mockery of a trial. The defense lawyer says to this seething, snarling mob, he makes an actual defense. He's a bum, but he makes an actual defense, saying, "Look, this guy is insane." Because Peter Lorre has said, "Look, I can't help it. I have these compulsions." The mob wants to tear him apart anyway because he's a child murderer. And it's so weird, though, to watch this. It's an incredible movie to watch this scene where this bum of a lawyer, this fake lawyer, is actually arguing for civilization here. We hate him. Everybody has to hate him. He's a child killer. But the bum is saying, you have to realize it. Let the state take him and deal with him. And at the last minute, the police come in. The lawyer turns out the quote-unquote lawyer has saved this guy's life, the criminal's life, from the mob. But the reason I bring it up here is mob justice is no justice at all. Right. And
really
that's what today, I don't know if you saw this, but they had as we're talking here earlier today, or maybe it was yesterday, there was another police shooting in suburban Minneapolis.
Yeah.
Terrible thing. The woman cop who shot him, according to the police, she was reaching for her taser, thought she had grabbed her taser, grabbed her gun, shot and killed the guy. Mm-hmm. Well, at the press conference, the chief of police talked about the riot that followed, and black journalists in the audience said, "Don't say that. You can't call it a riot."
Right.
That's what we're talking about here.
Well, and that's the thing. It's like you can't tell the truth, you have to be able to tell the truth, and and look, I come from, a family of lawyers. My grandfather was a defense attorney. My father was an attorney. My brother's an attorney. So it kind of is in the family, and, the entitlement to a defense is a real bedrock thing, and to sort of so casually sort of toss it out the window because we just know that he's guilty, is a scary thing. But I don't see how this ends in any kind of satisfactory way. I'm worried that it's not going to end in any kind of satisfactory way, and I think that there's going to be rioting. I hope I'm wrong, but it's we're seeing the connective tissue that holds our communities and our society and our nation together. We see this continual erosion, and what troubles me is that there don't seem to be enough adults that are, who have access to the megaphones. I mean, you and I have you have a platform with your blog that is quite large, and your Substack, which is large. We've got this little, channel here where we're trying to sort of just, jabber about the news and jabber about culture stuff. But I'm concerned that there aren't enough people who have a large enough megaphone who are just sort of saying, guys, we need to calm this down. I think that the commons, the digital commons, in cable news and in social media is so polluted by ill-motivated people. I make it a habit on Twitter to follow people that, you would sort of on a political checklist or cultural checklist are my opposites, right? And I'm watching them tweet about the trial, and I'm watching them, just they're doing nothing but stoking the rage. And
right.
Earlier on your blog, you said something like, "What are they preparing us for?"
Yeah, exactly. Where does this end? Here's the thing too. Critical race theory. It's one of its tenets is if there are any disparities in society, then it is the fault of white supremacy, any racial disparities.
That's right.
So on the documents I posted today from the reader of mine who's in a master's program in education, in the documents, which I encourage people to go to the blog to see them, there are points in the thing saying that that if you blame the culture of the family for the kid not performing well, then that's racism. And in other words, there are no possible reasons within this conception for a child of color doing poorly except for white racism. So and
this is a tragedy, Rod. This is a tragedy.
Okay.
This is a tragedy in the making.
Okay, yeah, but let me finish here. If we get an entire generation of people, white or black, brown, believing that the only explanation for inequities in the world or for bad things happening or for a verdict that doesn't go the way that they think it should in the Chauvin trial, things like that, if they think the only reason for this is white people have come after them, have set it up to be this way, that is a recipe for Rwanda. That is a recipe for Nazi Germany. And it would have been utterly hyperbolic to say this even a year ago. But the more you start seeing this, like, where could this possibly be going? And people have said to me on the blog, like, well, what do you mean by they? What is this coded language? There's no coded language there. I'm talking about the elites who are pushing this. And through society, this malignant ideology, this illiberal, malignant ideology that is causing people to see other people only in terms of race and to blame people in terms of race. It can't go anywhere good.
So this is the last thing I wanted to ask you about for today's episode, because we're ending up on time here. But what is it about these identitarian movements, critical race theory, critical social justice movements? Why is it so destabilizing? It really seems particularly effective. Certainly more effective than anything I've seen in my lifetime of truly destabilizing. Is that even the right word? I don't know if I feel like I'm speaking incorrectly, but it is having such a profoundly negative effect on the social fabric that I don't know why it seems so uniquely well suited to be so destructive.
I think Alistair McIntyre got to it in After Virtue when he talked about emotivism. He said that, in the wake of the Enlightenment having failed to set aside reason as a firm foundation for a post-religious society, then we fall back on our feelings, on how do things feel, and since you can't argue with feelings, and I can't know exactly what you're feeling, Kale. All we can do is argue about the strength of our emotions, and this, I think, is why you absolutely cannot argue about any of this stuff with the people who believe strongly in it, because they believe that you having a different opinion is a personal attack. You microaggressed against me. And this is all in McIntyre. McIntyre saw this coming 40 years ago. It said it was already here. And I find that sometimes I can't even talk to certain younger conservative friends, because they've gotten so jacked up on whatever social media they've had that if you disagree with them, well, then you're guilty of Trump derangement syndrome, or you're this or you're that. They take it as a personal attack. This is it's going far more, I think, on the left, but I think it is a disease that is within our society more broadly.
Yeah, I listened to a fascinating podcast the other day. It was Benjamin Boyce. I think it's the Voice of Reason or something like that. And he had on his show James Lindsay from New Discourses, the author of Cynical Theories and a couple of other things. And Wokel Distance, I think is his name. I'm not sure James Wokel or something like that. Anyway, it was an absolutely fascinating conversation, because they were talking about postmodernism, and they were talking about the po-mods, and then but they were also talking about the trad pomos. And their point, this larger point, and it's a very dense conversation, I recommend it, but their larger point is that we truly live in this sort of strange postmodern moment, and that we fool ourselves if conservatives fool themselves if they don't see that they are just as prone to living in the hyper reality of post-modernity every bit as much as the wokesters. And my concern on the right is that the traditionally minded folks will concede the argument to the postmoderns and set up their own false realities, their own paralogies, as Lindsay would say. And I really think that we're in that moment.
That's what QAnon is, right?
Totally. But I think it's even more pernicious than that.
Yeah. Well, a friend of mine was telling me, by the way, that there's a new thing called pastel QAnon. Pastel QAnon? What is that? And he said that it keeps a lot of the crazy baby-eating pedophile aspect of QAnon, but it takes the political stuff out. So you can have your crazy conspiracy theory without being a Republican. He said that a lot of yoga teachers in California and others are giving themselves over to it. It's total madness. But I remind you, our friend Hannah Arendt, Origins of Totalitarianism, said this is a precursor to totalitarianism. I mean, it's all lights are flashing now.
Give me the line, then. Give me the rant. What is the precursor to totalitarianism?
What do you mean?
As she's seeing it, like, is she talking about like sort of the loss of faith in truth,
when people won't, when people believe whatever they want to believe, when people don't care about the truth, they just care about what feels right to them. That's one of the precursors, as well as mass loneliness and atomization, the collapse of faith in institutions, all the things that we're living through today. So, what form will this totalitarianism take? Well, I've got opinions on that. I wrote a book about it, but I believe it's going to be the social credit system. And the thing we started talking about today, you and I, about big business becoming more and more involved in throwing its weight around on political issues that don't have anything to do with business. They came up, Sonnenfeld, the guy who started the thing, told the NBC News, well, business leaders are concerned for social harmony. We want social harmony.
That sounds like the Chi-Coms. My gosh.
Yeah.
I mean, seriously. That's social harmony is precisely the argument that they're making for the amount of control that they have on their populace.
I hadn't thought about that.
that's literally what they say.
Yeah, and so they want social harmony by that's giving me my next blog, my friend.
There it is. Well, boom, right here, people.
When we record next week, I will be sitting in a different place.
Oh, I won't. Go ahead.
No, I'll be sitting in Budapest, in Hungary, the capital of Hungary. I'm going over there to take a fellowship at the Danube Institute, a think tank that's devoted to issues of mutual concern between the Visegrad countries, Czech Republic, Slovakia, Hungary, Poland, that region, and the West, America and Western Europe. So I'll be there. What I'm hoping to do on my fellowship, I'll be there through the end of July, is go even further in studying the communist experience in Hungary, talk more to dissidents, and to see what more I can learn about from them about what they went through then that can give insights to what we're going through now. So I'm really looking forward to it, Kale. But I got to tell you, though, I mean, I think I mentioned this earlier. I mean, locked down from 7 to 7 at night. There's a curfew. Europe has handled this virus so much worse than we have.
Differently,
weirdly.
Yes. We were told that we were handling it much worse, though, earlier, but only to find out that that's not true.
We were, but it's going to be interesting to me, too, to be in Europe at this time. I can't remember if we got to talk about it last week or not, but just talking to my different friends and publishers, because my book, Living Out Biologics, is going to be coming out in Spain and France and Italy and other countries over the next couple of months. And they're really struggling to figure out when they can release it, if I'll even be able to get into those countries. I had to get a special letter to even get across the border in Hungary to let them know I'm going to be working there, because they won't let you in otherwise. I think there's going to be a tremendous political upheaval against the EU after this is over, because all of my friends over there, even one guy who's not even conservative, just furious at the way the EU has botched this. So I'll be there to see if this thing, God willing, will start to relax. It's going to be fascinating to sort of pick up on what political currents there are.
Well, I wonder just quickly as I hear you say this out loud, I hadn't quite put two and two together, but the COVID lockdowns throughout Europe, might just give people a taste of what the bureaucracy they have erected and allowed themselves to work under in the last 50 years or so, what it actually is capable of doing. And I wonder if they're keen on what they've seen. I mean, I think that'll be a really interesting thing for you to watch and to listen to, that this degree of social control it's got to be chilling on some level, especially since it's been terribly ineffective in actually dealing with the ostensible reason for all of the lockdowns. It's a very fascinating moment. So
it really is. And I'll be there, but our readers, our listeners, our viewers need to know that we're still going to be doing this.
We're going to keep it going.
I'm going to try, once I get my feet on the ground there, to bring in people for interviews here, maybe add some more content. Right. Maybe we can even, if I'm thinking out loud here, but if I'm able, with COVID restrictions there, to interview dissidents who are good enough, their English is good enough, maybe we can do some premium content. So
great. Yeah,
we'll see. We'll figure it out. But all the best. Have a great summer, Kale.
Oh, yeah, thanks. Yeah, thanks. Well, here in Rhode Island, we will have a great summer because the summers are glorious. So really, you just need to say that to your folks. So, all right. All right, well, look, send us off here.
Don't get nothing on you. I learned how to say it in Magyar.
Take care. All right, bye-bye.
Bye.